Good morning. Good morning and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Greater Naples. My name is Tony Fisher. I serve this congregation as its minister, and we're grateful to have you with us this morning. Wherever you are, however you're dressed, we're happy to have you here this morning. I'm happy to have, as always, Daniel Goodsit in the AV closet with John Forsyth close at hand, Stu Shelton at the piano, and Steve Espinoza leading our hymns this morning. I do want to express my excitement, and if you haven't been looking at your emails, that we are beginning the process of reopening, and beginning in early July, we'll be welcoming folks onto our pavilion to watch the service in person from there, and then moving into the sanctuary at some point in August. So we're excited about that. We hope you are as well. We're trying to be as careful as possible, but it will be good to be back with one another again real soon. And with that, I'd love to introduce to you our worship associate for this morning, Joanne Husky.
Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Greater Naples. My name is Joanne Husky, and I am your worship associate this morning. Whether you're watching us live on Facebook this morning, or whether you're catching us later in the week, we want you to know that you are always welcome here. If you're watching live, feel free to chat with others. Use the chat button to connect with others in our congregation. We are a welcoming community, freely seeking spiritual and intellectual growth. We strive to create a larger community of peace, justice, and love. If you've joined us since the pandemic and you'd like to know more about what's going on in this amazing congregation, you can find out more. We urge you to check out our website or email our office at office@uunaples.org. We would love to hear from you. There really is a lot going on, even during this time of separation. So please take a peek at the email notices that are being sent out weekly and monthly. They give you lots of opportunities for fellowship and education, opportunities to enrich your mind, your body, and your spirit. You can also check out our UUCGN Virtual Coffee Hour Facebook page if you'd like to chat with members of our congregation in a more informal way. Here are just a few of the activities you may want to try. You can join the 2021 UU Drawdown Eco Challenge, organized by the Green Sanctuary Committee. The UU Ministry for Earth is offering an opportunity for congregations all around the United States to participate in an eco challenge based on the book Draw Down by Paul Hawkins. This challenge runs from now until the end of June. It will culminate in a presentation at the UUA General Assembly, where we will be able to celebrate all of the efforts. We formed a team with other UU congregations in Florida and are calling our team the Southwest Florida Drawdown. You can sign up by going to the website drawdown.ecochallenge.org and select Join. The Mindful Meditation Group continues to meet here every Saturday morning from 10:30 to 11:30 on our pavilion. All are welcome to join. And Gentle Yoga with Lois happens each day on Zoom from 12 to 1. If you're interested in participating in that, you need to email and send your phone number to Lois, cdw3@gmail.com. So details for these and so many other opportunities on Zoom are available if you've signed up for our weekly newsletters. So please now get comfortable. Turn off your cell phones and take a deep breath. And let's all settle in for worship with this morning's prelude.
We come together today seeking a reality beyond our narrow selves, a reality that binds us in compassion, in love and understanding to other human beings, and into the interdependent web of all living things. As we journey on, may our minds be opened to the power and the insight that weave together the scattered threads of our experience and help us remember the wholeness of which we are a part. Let's join together in our chalice lighting words on your screen. In the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment we gather this day. May the flame we now kindle be to us a symbol of the unity we seek. And let's join together in singing our opening hymn, Break Not the Circle.
Love, enabling love, where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not the circle, make it wider still, till it includes embracing all the living. Come under Arthur's love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with humor spoken, and people keep no score of wrong and guilt, but will that human bonds remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till people of whatever race or nation will truly be themselves, stand on their own, see eye to eye with laughter and elation.
I ran across a presentation that my father made to his Unitarian Universalist congregation in the Virgin Islands many years ago when my parents were living there. And he had created this presentation from a number of different sources, one of which was a paper I guess I had written in a class at Harvard Extension when I was sort of investigating at that point the option of ministry, maybe 10 years before I actually did that. But what he wrote about, what was interesting to me, was that his own personal experiences of Universalism. He grew up in Newton, Massachusetts, and was for the most part unchurched in his growing up in the 30s and 40s. I mean, in the 20s and 30s. But when he visited his grandparents in Fitchburg, Massachusetts, he would go to church with them in the Universalist congregation in downtown Fitchburg. And there he would go, and he was pleasantly surprised at what he found in that Universalist congregation. He told the story about his parents, my grandparents, who actually went to Sunday school in that church, and that my grandmother remembered very fondly that my grandfather's grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, actually taught my grandmother in Sunday school in a Universalist congregation. So there's a little family history involved in this morning's presentation. But he talked about being pleasantly appreciative of the worship and the message of the Universalist congregation there. I've often spoken about the affirmation that we shared in my Unitarian church growing up, that love is the doctrine of this church and the quest for truth is its sacrament. They too had a similar affirmation that spoke of the brotherhood of man and the leadership of Jesus and salvation by character and the unlimited possibilities that were the birthright of every human soul. they found a sort of a welcome home in the Unitarian Church where I grew up, in Lexington, Massachusetts, when my parents and grandparents moved in together and as 4 adults raised 4 children, including me, the youngest. And those universalist values weren't lifted up that much. The Unitarian congregation there was a humanist congregation. It was rich in intellect. A wonderful bedroom community of Boston where there were professors and so forth living and attending. And the services went up here more often than down here. And in terms of Unitarian Universalism, we often talk about that sort of tension between the Unitarians' rationality and the Universalist expression of love. Universalism in America, it was really the only time that Universalism found expression in an organized church. And it came to be in colonial times as Unitarianism did. And there were wonderful stories all along the way. The founder of the Organization of American Universalism, John Murray, had some wonderful stories throughout his career in sort of forming this entity called the Universalist Church of America. One of which happened when he was actually back in England before he came to the United States, to the New World, and he was at that point involved in Methodism and the Wesleyan branch of Methodism. And at one point he was called to go out and visit a woman who had been converted to Universalism by James Relly, who had been preaching that in England, in London at the time. And he went to visit this woman to bring her back into the fold, but the result was he himself was converted to Universalism, that idea that God's love was too great to damn all of humanity to hell for eternity. And so he adopted that brand of Christianity, that universal sense of salvation. All along the way, from that point in time when Universalism's single theological point was God's love, and that the expression of the purity of God's love could never find fruition in the damnation of any part of humanity to hell for eternity. Went through an evolution of sorts, as did Unitarianism, over the course of the next 150 years. For Universalists, however, they maintained their Christian identity, at least internally, though they weren't necessarily recognized as Christians because Universalism was a sort of a heresy. But they expressed this in many different ways, not the least of which was a sense of social responsibility, of living the social gospel. And there were wonderful people emulating that in their lives. John Murray's wife, Judith Sargent Murray, was a wonderful writer, in fact, a better theologian than John was. And she wrote a catechism for Universalism, but she also talked very openly about women's rights and the fact that this new idea, this new freedom in religion should, in fact, include the women. And that was reflected all the way down Universalist time through the 19th century, with many women involved in the suffrage movement from the very early part of that century. It involved the abolitionists. Mary Livermore, one of the most ardent abolitionists, sort of living the gospel of universalism, of love for all humanity, and therefore we need to be engaged in that. Clara Barton, who we know as the angel of the battlefield, who was the first president of the Red Cross Association, was a universalist and living every day her values of love in the world. So many more. Olympia Brown, the first ordained women minister who was fully recognized by a denomination, had ministerial standing, also a suffragette, and active in that movement, as well as sort of uplifting all people in this land of inequality. That social gospel got to be a sort of a bigger piece of the universalist culture. And in the early part of the 20th century, Clarence Skinner sort of gave that form in a message, and he said, "Universalists are free. And they have pledged themselves to break the tyrannies of the mind and strike the shackles of tradition from the soul. And if they are true to the spirit of this faith, they pledge themselves to free humanity from economic degradation, which fetters it body, mind, and soul in this 20th century. Universalism is, by its very genius, led into the social maelstrom because it is essentially a battle for the freedom of the common man in a struggle to complete emancipation. The universalist idea of God is that of a universal, impartial, immanent spirit whose nature is love. So you begin to see an evolution from a single theological point of God's love to God being love, and that needing to be exemplified out in the world. After World War II, that idea of social gospel is still percolating throughout a diminishing faith. Universalism was diminishing in part because much of the mainstream denominations in the United States were loosening up themselves and finding that they could comfortably welcome folks who had a universalist mindset. So people didn't need to leave and convert. They could stay where they were and still have that sense. But also, Universalism was a faith that sort of had settled itself comfortably in the rural environment, and that movement from rural country into the city, into industrialism, also diminished a lot of the congregations along the way. After World War II, there was a sense of trying to sort of give a new identity to Universalism by expanding its identity to being a universal religion, welcoming all ideas and all thoughts, sort of an eclectic mix of things into one religion where all people could feel comfortable. This new idea of a universal religion was expressed by one of its most prolific ministers, the Reverend Ken Patton, of whom a few people, when I arrived here at UUCGN, had been in his congregation in Ridgewood, New Jersey. Patton wrote, "All the law and morality gathered into one ethic and jurisprudence," that's universalism. "All the prophets of all faiths installed in one pantheon of spiritual heroes. All the poetry and prophecy canonized in a single Bible. All the scattered tribes and nations citizens in one commonwealth. In this universal faith," he wrote, "in which all wisdom and goodness are made one, we find a home for the human spirit, the adequacy of generous desires, the farthest dimension of our aspiration." Universalism, from its beginning in the late 1700s through to the merger of the two denominations in 1961, had evolved from a universalist theology of God's love into a universal religion welcoming all and all truths. And we find that still in our recognition of all the sources of our tradition, that expression of a more universal religion that could welcome all. That's universalism to date. Where we find ourselves now, I think, requires a new vision. Let's center ourselves and our hearts and minds into a time of quiet and meditation.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. there is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. There is more joy somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more joy somewhere.
When we do gather together again, it will be wonderful to be able to hear with folks present our joys and our sorrows. And while we're still trying to figure out what that looks like in a post-COVID environment, we know that at least we will be able to be with one another, to share with one another our joys and our sorrows. There is so much going on that can wear down our hearts in this world. The news bombards us every day. And our own lives are never quite clear of some need of sharing, whether it be a joy or a sorrow, whether it be something of our own or something of a family member or something of a friend. We take this time every week to share. And while we can't do that in person, I urge you to take a deep breath and think of someone who has been in your mind lately, whether it be an issue of health or anything, and speak their name out loud now. And let us all remember that there is a love holding us. It rests in each of our hearts and collectively in this congregation, in a caring community. Let's center ourselves for our meditation this morning. This from the Reverend Leslie Takahashi. They teach us to read in black and white. Truth is this, the rest is false. You are whole or you're broken. Who you love is acceptable or not. Life tells its truth in many hues. We are taught to think either or, to believe in the teachings of Jesus or Buddha, to believe in human potential or in a power beyond a single will. I am broken or I am powerful. Life embraces multiple truths, speaks of both and of and. We are taught to see in absolutes. Good versus evil, male versus female, old versus young, gay versus straight. Let us see the fractions, the spectrum, the margins. Let us open our hearts to the complexity of our worlds. Let us make our lives sanctuaries to nurture our many identities. The day is coming when all will know that the rainbow world is much more gorgeous than the monochrome, that a river of identities can ebb and flow over the static, that the margins hold the center. Let's take some time in silence.
90. The spacecraft Voyager 1 was about 4 billion miles away from Earth and about to depart the solar system. At Carl Sagan's suggestion, NASA engineers turned the ship around to take one last image of its home planet. What you see on your screen was the result. It inspired Sagan to write these words: "The Pale Blue Dot" by Carl Sagan. Look again at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The aggregate of our joy and suffering, thousands of confident religions, ideologies, and economic doctrines. Every hunter and forager, every hero and coward, every creator and destroyer of civilization, every king and peasant, every young couple in love, every mother and father, hopeful children, inventor and explorer, every teacher of morals, every corrupt politician, every superstar, every supreme leader, every saint and sinner in the history of our species lived there, here, on a mote of dust suspended in a sunbeam. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors, so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. The Earth is the only world known so far to harbor life. There's nowhere else, at least in the near future, to which our species can migrate. Visit, yes. Settle, not yet. Like it or not, for the moment, the Earth is where we make our stand. It has been said that astronomy is a humbling and character-building experience. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we have ever known. Now is the time for us to express our gratitude for this congregation and all the ways in which it nourishes our lives. For the way it has kept us together during this year and almost a year and a half of pandemic. to its good and generous people. From the beauty of our sanctuary and our memorial garden to the outreach in our wider community. For this and all of this, we are grateful. While you were away, people here have been working to improve our sanctuary, our building, and the grounds. And we will be ready to welcome you back when the time comes. But for now, please show your gratitude and mail your contribution today for the ongoing mission of this congregation. It will be gratefully received. To find our address and lots more about this congregation, please go to www.uunaples.org. Thank you. A Beautiful Assortment by John T. Cresswell, Jr. Our galaxy is one little speck among trillions of specks in the universe. Like the lines on a zebra or the human fingerprint, no two galaxies appear to be exactly alike. There are varying solar systems and planets and many suns in these galaxies, each with different dimensions. We live in an expansive and diverse universe. But you don't have to go to outer space to learn that lesson. Right here on Earth, There are millions of types of species, animals, insects, trees, plants, and sea creatures. There's fresh water and salt water, blue water, green water, tropic and Arctic climates. And then there are the people. All types with varying languages and customs. Life is a beautiful, profound, diverse assortment. We have so much to celebrate.
And then there are the people. I have to give a shout out to my friend and former colleague in the publishing business, Joe Hinckley, who, when faced with the dilemma of a blown schedule and being asked to explain what was going on, what happened, he would smile and he would say, human beings were involved. We have, as Unitarian Universalists, a set of 7 principles, and at each end there are what I think of as the pillars, the 2 important principles that support the others. The first is that we affirm and promote the dignity and worth of every person. And the 7th is that we affirm and promote the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. They speak to a universalist ethic, that we are all God's creatures, and we need to treat each other in the way that God would love us to express our love. James Ishmael Ford, who was present, as I was, but less articulate about it, at the 1985 General Assembly, where our current purposes and principles were adopted, spoke of that moment when they finally sort of came together with that 7th principle. We had talked forever in Unitarian and Universalist circles about the worth and dignity of the individual. And that was predominant in the conversations. But what really galvanized that assembly was the final expression of the 7th principle. The interdependent web of which we all are a part. It held it together. It gave us, as Ford said, a new call to universalism. Now, the trouble is that sometimes our sense of the universal, that interdependent web, doesn't focus down enough on our uniqueness, on our individual identities of our nations, of our differences, of what holds us together as a people, those universal values that we espouse, and in general, most people espouse. Don't allow us to really dig into our differences, of which there are many. Yes, there's an essential commonality of humanity. And yes, we need to lift that up, but also we need to live in the differences because that's what we're faced with every single day. Unitarian Universalism, at its inception, spoke of its own Trinity, freedom, reason, and tolerance. Those were the important values that we put forward. But the world doesn't necessarily support those three ideas together anymore. Certainly, we believe in freedom, but not a narrow view of freedom that serves those who are privileged. Freedom, if it is expressed, needs to be fully enabled in humanity. And then we have a long way to go before that happens. Reason is important. It has been the foundation of especially our Unitarian tradition from the day it was sort of inaugurated in the Baltimore Address given by William Ellery Channing when he said, God gave us this reason, we need to use it. But reason is not the ultimate. It is only a piece of our wholeness. We need to grow into that wholeness and the richness of our complex selves. Reason and feeling, judgment, love, anger, hate. Sometimes in UU land, we don't like to get our hands too messy in those troubling feelings of hate, but we feel them. A new universalism would speak to our wholeness as individual human beings and incorporate that richness of diverse feelings and identities into a new wholeness of humanity living on the earth. One of the folks that I read a lot is Parker Palmer, a Quaker educator, but philosopher, writer. He talks about what happens when we get anxious, when there's tension in our lives, when we lose a sense of control, which, if you've been awake for a while, I think we all feel. We are suffering. We are anxious. Some, yes, more than others, but we have all felt the discomfort of this past year. 600,000 of our own American citizens dead, millions across the globe. Social unrest following the death of George Floyd, not the first, but certainly played upon a larger stage than any other, and the recognition of our inherent racism as a culture. The violence that followed. The upheaval on January 6th, when people who were seriously angry tried to change the course of our political lives. Parker Palmer said, violence arises when we do not know what else to do with our suffering. Recognizing our suffering and dealing with it face to face, looking at anger in the face and hatred and learning how to deal with it would be our role as universalists in this world. Of being able to hold the tension in our own lives and in our communities and in our society so that something creative can bubble up. A universalism that recognizes not just those folks that we feel kinship to, or we feel paternalistic to, that we feel we need to lift up over here, but a universalism that embraces the whole of humanity and the need for us to reach across those boundaries, inspired by the humility brought about by feeling our sense of ourselves in the universe, of looking again at that pale blue dot and feeling humbled by it. Barbara Taylor Bradford wrote, "The wisdom of the Desert Father includes the wisdom that the hardest spiritual work in the world is to love the neighbor as self, to encounter another human being not as someone you can use, change, fix, help, save, enroll, convince, or control, but simply as someone who can spring you from the prison of yourself, if you allow it." The work of loving our neighbors as ourselves is the hardest lesson, requiring incredible humility. It does not involve a utopian vision of the future. I've often stood here and talked about that beloved community that we are striving for. But beloved community rests here in our hearts if we allow it. And with humility begin to help one another, to meet one another face to face, to recognize our common humanity and our struggle to accept difference. Requires imagination. It requires that we cherish this world and desire to save it. It requires that we believe that we can affect the tenor not of some future day, but of this day. It requires engagement, active engagement in this world, and not of retreat, not of escaping that tension, that anxiety, our own hatreds and distrusts. Our religious tradition has always engaged at its best, has always felt called to live its love out into the world, not to retreat, but to face the daily hard facts of life. And with love, embrace. Our benediction today comes from James Baldwin, not a universalist, someone who struggled mightily with our society, but who chose ultimately to embrace life. He wrote, "One must say yes to life and embrace it wherever it is found, and it is found in terrible places. For nothing is fixed. Forever and forever and forever it is not fixed. The earth is always shifting, the light is always changing, the sea does not cease to grind down rock. Generations do not cease to be born, and we are responsible to them because we are the only witnesses they have. The sea rises, the light fails, lovers cling to each other, and children cling to us. The moment we cease to hold each other, the moment we break faith with one another, the sea engulfs us and the light goes out." My best wishes to you on this day. Go in peace. Go in love.